Style podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 35. Style. Where's your style, man?
Okay, Eric, we're going to talk about a wide range of topics. Style being, the center of this solar system. So we've had a lot of off-air discussions about the importance of style, and I mean, it's a subject of learning music that I think a lot of people pay lip service to, and they'll encourage students like, oh, listen to different genres and different styles of music. But it is quite an issue in terms of planning a curriculum where if you don't purposely put in different types of music, swing, bebop, Latin music, Baroque music, rock music, or whatever, it's very easy for the student to not have a big enough listening vocabulary to make discriminations among these different styles. And so we need to kind of unpack, like, what is style? Like, what do each of us think about what style even is? Because style is more than just phrasing, right? It's a bunch of things.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, so and maybe style, like if you say rock, I mean, how many hundreds of styles of rock are there? I don't know about hundreds, but scores for sure, right? And take the blues, there's a whole lot of difference in style among blues artists.
Yeah.
Or anything, the classical style. Well, there's Mozart classical, and then there's, Bach's Kids classical.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't know where you are in terms of a definition. I'm not married to this definition I'm about to give, but style is essentially the conventions of all the parts that go into making music. So the instrumentation, the phrasing, the harmonic patterns, the typical rhythm patterns, the meters that are used, the tonalities that are used, all of those have something to do with what style is. I do think that phrasing is really important for style, because if you look at something like early bebop compared to swing, so many of the things are the same, but the bebop phrasing is a lot different than and it's clearly like a continuation of swing phrasing, but it is something different. It has a different set of conventions that go along with it.
Well, the music that gave birth or gave rise to bebop couldn't contain all the notes that people wanted to play. So bebop became an extension of something that really got started earlier, right? So there's lots of gray in this, right? Because you can have the blues style can be just the progression. They don't always swing. Some of it's boogie woogie, like that, and some of it's chubby checker. And that veers into the early rock and roll.
You can play a blues progression with like a Latin feel too, right? I mean,
let's do a Mozartian blues. What would that sound like? A Bach blues, a blues, contrapuntal blues.
Yeah.
But that, now we're purposely crashing styles together to get something out of it. But to me, style, like before you teach a piece of music, if it's a style that hasn't been encountered before, I don't even bother. Just give them listening. Here, listen to these pieces. Listen to this, artist. Listen to this era, right? Get them. Just do that for a few weeks or a month or years or whatever. Get yourself immersed in understanding the variety within that style, so that style will stick out against other styles. So, here we go with the, A being everything, but A B among styles and A B within the style.
Yeah, so this is such a good point, and this is something that's actually been recommended to me by, random classical professors specifically. But if you're learning like a Mozart piece, don't just listen to different interpretations of that exact piece you're learning. Listen to other pieces that were composed within, the same suite or similar time period, so you can get a sense of the style, because you're not going to inductively learn. You're not going to make comparisons of sameness and difference by just listening to the same exact recording over and over again. That can help a lot with precision to detail, repetitive listening, but you don't get this wider context of
Right.
of a lot of things. But I think a lot of it comes down to phrasing. I mean, that's something that a lot of students don't have a grasp of. They'll be able to pull off the progressions and the technique, but they don't hear the punchline of the phrasing.
Yeah.
And that can be a big problem without the listening vocabulary.
Totally. The other thing it's hard to get is form, and sometimes form is contingent on the style or vice versa. So this phrasing bit and the form definitely goes together. And these are the hardest things to audiate, aren't they? Like, how do you teach style without just being immersed in it? It's not necessarily hard, it just takes a while if you don't have a huge listening vocabulary. And so much of what we tend to do as teachers is not incorporate enough styles in our curriculum. I just think it's completely missing. I don't hear a lot of rhythm patterns that swing or rhythm patterns that are Latin derived, or just rhythm patterns that have some style to them versus typically what you hear when you're delivering learning sequence activities in rhythm. So, and
I mean, you've talked about this with teaching kids, like just typical bebop rhythm patterns. So not short, not necessarily super long things, but like da da ba da.
Yeah.
That one is super common. Bill Evans does that one so much. It's in so much stuff.
Yeah.
That's funny.
I wish I could sing bebop. Yeah, so there's the need to develop that huge listening vocabulary. Without that, it's really not worth trying to nurse a kid through a style with rhythm patterns. Just listen, and move. Of course, move your body while you're listening, and that'll get you the style over time. And there's no right way or right. You just want differences, right? So the differences between whatever style you might have been working on prior, white jazz and black jazz. When you listen to Benny Goodman.
That's what I was thinking.
And Paul Whitehead or whatever, and then listen to Duke Ellington. And before him, go back and do Fletcher Henderson.
You mentioned something about sameness and difference, and I think this is a really important practical point to mention for teachers designing their curriculum, but also just people that are trying to develop their own sense of style. If you make a listening playlist for yourself, it seems so intuitive to, okay, I want to learn Mozart's style, so that means I should just listen to a ton of Mozart. Not necessarily. What's more useful to do is make a playlist that goes from like Mozart to Chopin, Mozart to Bach, Mozart to something totally out of left field. And the more skilled you are, the closer the discriminations can be. So for a student that really doesn't understand Mozart's phrasing at all, go from Mozart to like Nirvana, like something just completely different. But the more, if you go from like Mozart to Mendelssohn, it's a subtler distinction. And so it's key when you're doing this stuff to arrange the sameness and difference.
Bookend it.
Yeah.
Go start with Handel. All right, go through Mozart and then get up to Tchaikovsky. That's a wide, but you don't have to listen to a lot to really hear big differences. And then of course you can narrow that path. But yeah.
This is actually a really good point too, is that you don't necessarily need to have a super long playlist. So for example, if you wanted to make a 20-minute playlist like Ren Blake recommends in his book Primacy of the Ear, which you should read if you haven't read, we're not talking about like 20 minutes of Mozart and then 20 minutes of Bach and then like it's not necessary to have super long demonstrations of the elements you're trying to make comparisons with. Like I'm talking about make a little thing, make a little recording, put your iPhone next to a speaker or something and record a couple Mozart melodies from your favorite interpreter like Glenn Gould or God knows who. You can just insert your favorite musician and then put a couple melodies from a different composer in. And so these can be short things. I'm talking about like 20 seconds of listening to this, then 20 seconds of that, and 20. And that's what Blake actually recommends is when he talks about making a playlist, you're making a series of excerpts that are, a minute to 2 minutes long kind of max. You don't need to listen to like a 45-minute symphony to soak it in. You need little examples. Just like when you first start teaching melodies to young students, you don't sing them symphonies, right? You sing them little melodies that establish the tonality and the meter really clearly and just short little things that they can grab onto. But they have a variety of tonalities and they have a variety. And all Eric and I are claiming here is you should be cautious about only looking at your curriculum through the lens of tonality and rhythm and harmony even. You need to make sure you're covering different elements of style, especially phrasing. Or people just won't learn it. It's not just going to naturally happen unless they just have the most ludicrous listening vocabulary on their own.
Yeah, I made a pretty extensive playlist, and it's 2 hours of blues, and it goes from as far back as I can to as present as I can, and I picked good stuff. I didn't go through and cover everybody, but I just picked stuff that represents Chicago or electronic instruments being used, or back in the Mississippi Delta stuff, or Kansas City blues. Obviously that came all from New Orleans, and like there's just a lot of rich traditions. And then there's boogie woogie, right? The stuff that doesn't even swing; it's completely duple, bop bop bop, bop, right? And it's interesting to listen to that. And part of the style too is also the content of the lyrics. When you talk blues, there's almost none of the early stuff goes without words, and those words could come from, extraordinary amount of pain generally initially. Mm-hmm. But style is this huge factor in what you it's like you might dislike certain styles. So my point would be to make to you is that, well, you just haven't found something that you like in that particular style. Like some people will go so far as, I don't listen to hip hop, I never will. And it's like, well, there's some great stuff, you just got to find it for yourself. The content has to be right to be teaching it, depending on the age of your student, of course. Sure. But if you've got enough context around anything, you can. It's valuable to teach. We weren't nice to people, and they came with a music that was deeply felt and helped them get through tough times. I can say that to a third grader.
You bring up a really good point about genres and style that I want to second. That I remember in high school being very like, these are the genres I like, and anything outside of that is evil. It was basically like classical music, jazz, and instrumental guitar, electric guitar stuff. And so pop was evil, all this other stuff was evil. And why? In my mind, because the chord progressions weren't cool enough in pop. But then if you stop and think like, okay, is Billy Joel's chord progression, are Billy Joel's chord progressions not good enough for you? If not, I mean, I feel bad for you as a musician because he's doing a lot of interesting stuff. So now I take a little bit of a more open-minded approach in the sense that I don't really put down any single genre. There are definitely songs and even full-blown discographies of musicians that I don't like and that I won't listen to. But I don't really like country. But I like instrumental country music. I just realized I don't really like country singers. That's just not my thing. But there are specific songs that I like, and there are specific singers that I can tolerate more. But country, like instrumentation, is
Yeah.
amazing. There's a lot of virtuosity and things I can get behind. So it's often just finding, specific um, instantiations of what you like.
Yeah. It's like, can you go back to Johnny Cash and what brought him to be who he was? And then, I got, you get into the history, you see, you can have an appreciation for it without necessarily having to like it, I suppose. Um, I always tell
Yeah.
people the Ray Charles album, that's his country album. It's like, oh, well, I have to change my mind about this kind of stuff, or at least open the door into more of something. But my point in wanting to do this conversation was look and see the lack of variety in the rhythm patterns that we teach, or the listening vocabulary that we're giving our kids, and the movement vocabulary, and how that matches with the style of music that you want to have kids grow up knowing about. I mean, everybody, Mozart, Beethoven, etc., the Dead White People Society. But then, what about blues? Some people, the R&B of the present's way different than the R&B of Detroit back 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I just think we're doing people a disservice to not have way more variety, especially in style. And the style obviously is mostly determined by its rhythm. The style is inherent in rhythm mostly, but then there's also, like you said, Beau, phrasing, and then the form. The blues has a certain form, so that lends itself to a style. Uh, uh, and another thing I wanted to
Well,
touch real
I just
quick
wanted to
was,
add, and the
yeah,
harmonic progressions are I
yes,
think
yes,
those
yes,
those three elements, the the rhythm and the meter, harmonic and phrasing. I think those are the big kind of pillars in style and instrumentation. But see what I mean? It pulls everything in. It
yeah,
just
it does. And I wanted to correct something. I'm not sure if I heard it exactly right, but kids, little kids should be exposed to 20-minute symphonies too. Because
totally, totally. Yeah.
but you, in the context you were speaking, yeah, you don't sing 20-minute symphonies to kids, but
Yeah,
you can give them
all I
style
was saying,
to A-B stuff, and to give
yeah,
them
I
a
just
lot
mean if you
lot
really
more
want to
variety.
make the distinctions between one style and another like glaringly apparent, you don't need super long examples of
Yeah,
them. And shorter examples might actually suit your goal. And to carry that further, like something I often do with instrumentalists, and I think this is a great thing to do because often you need to play something multiple times in a row to get physical control over it. But by playing it in different styles, if you take a short melody, swing it once, maybe play it the next time with a really straight ahead Latin feel, and then try to play it, with a more laid back kind of blues swing opposed to like a bebop feel. And those are very different types of phrasing, and it's very enjoyable to do that. I've never really met a student that would prefer playing something 8 times in a row rather than changing the style up each time. And you can do it with these short little bites. And the distinctions start getting so specific. Like there's different phrasing patterns in how you would play Baroque music compared to something like just standard
oh, for
classical
sure.
Mendelssohn. There is this big difference in how you would phrase it, and that's what I mean about little short examples. There's differences
Yeah.
in where you put your staccatos and all that kind of stuff.
Listen to Buxtehude and then Bach. It's like if you want to go beginning to end kind of thing, maybe.
And a
Or
great way to start there is you make the discriminations ludicrous at first, especially when it's hard for the student to hear it. So if it's hard for them to hear the difference between, I mean, swing and Latin, you're changing the meter. Actually, that's like a big part of what you're doing there. And so those kind of distinctions can be really obvious for some people to hear. Some people will struggle with that. They'll need to hear a lot of um, examples.
yeah. Now let's just say within a typical jump right in curriculum, where most of the songs don't have a lot of style, but we could add style to it. Um, let's really emphasize the power of dynamics and articulation in these songs, and that makes for, small s style versus capital S style, like we're talking right now. But those differences need to be exaggerated for young children, especially. But I think we do less of that. I just hear too much vanilla uh, rhythm patterns. It's just too much vanilla, and I really want to encourage us to be a little more expressive and bring right. The expression will give style to something. Uh,
Yeah, and this, for me, this goes back to the difference between like a track curriculum and a spiral curriculum. I think it's very tempting for teachers to say, okay, I'll start with a good healthy dose of tonality, meter, rhythm patterns, tonal patterns, and then as they get older, I'll teach them about phrasing and articulation and dynamic. No, you start all the stuff at the same time because there's these crucial developmental windows for one thing that are going to have a bigger, if they learn this proper phrasing and articulation at a younger age, it's going to have a big impact. But even if you're teaching an adult student, I mean, there's so much joy to be found in, musicians are always pushing, right, Eric? I mean, people are always trying to like more technique, more difficult songs, crazier harmonic function. Like everything's just crazier all the time. Everything's being escalated. But like sometimes just slow down and instead of adding more content in terms of patterns, can you use the patterns you have in more interesting ways in terms of the phrasing and articulation? Because that's what you'll often find when you roll with a really good jazz musician or blues musician. They play the simplest things. They just lay it down so well. You're like, oh my god, duh.
yeah, I think stylistic context is one of those things that kind of holds everything else. I mean, it holds the form, it holds the phrasing, it holds the tonalities and meters that are likely, the harmonic progressions that are typical of that style. Like, what is the harmonic? You know, what is the speed of the progression? Uh,
Mm-hmm. Well, a great example of people not understanding style is people trying to learn about tritone subs. So people know you can go 2-5-1 and put a tritone sub with a 5 is, but if you haven't listened to enough jazz, you don't understand the punchline. You don't get it. And so the punchline is the one chord. It's not the tritone sub. People get all bent up and they're like, "Oh, it's really complicated and all this." It's not. It's you're heading to the one chord and there's just another way to do it. But if you haven't heard enough examples of that and the style that exists within, people tend to overcomplicate things, right? And so style is like I think you brought up a really good point. It's the meta context that's going over everything. And I was saying off air, if you take a musician like Kurt Cobain, it's very easy to look at him and say like, oh, whatever. He's not as good as my insert favorite classical or jazz musician. But the point the guy was making with his band and his music, it was a stylistic point. It was a change in the style of music. And so it's not always about cranking the harmony up to a billion or cranking making the rhythm patterns more adventurous, which are great things to do, and we obviously encourage all of that. But there's other elements that you can play around with.
yeah, and then there's your own personal style if we want to get a little bit more micro about it, right? That you can develop and encompass something that actually contributes to a vocabulary that's not out there or a repertoire that's uniquely your own. Everybody kind of sounds differently as a trumpet player playing the same piece, but you can hear the difference between Freddie Hubbard, Miles Davis, Clifford Brown. Name your other trumpet players you want. It's
My
just
wife has said this. My wife can tell if it's me playing guitar. If she like comes and meets me somewhere and she hears a bunch of guitar, she can tell it's me like within a second.
yeah,
Even if it's a lick someone else would play. There's just certain ways that I phrase things, I guess. I mean, I'm probably more oblivious to it than I've heard a lot of friends say that too. They can tell, that was my solo or whatever.
yep,
So developing a personal style. I mean, this is something that Rand Blake again talks about in his book, The Premise is the Ear. You can't do this unless you've absorbed other styles.
a
Right?
lot of other styles and really immersed yourself
I mean,
In
he calls it third streaming, where at minimum you're properly absorbing the elements of two different styles and then fusing them in a way that's but not theoretically, not like, oh, bebop has this and Latin has this, so I will. Or, no, it's happening like, subconsciously in terms of your
it
audiation.
it
You're just
yeah, it comes out of a mastery of particular elements that you really like among the artists that you really like. But what are the things that you really dig? I mean, you wouldn't incorporate anything in your style if you didn't like it, right? You would incorporate only those things that you like, but then there's mastery of the style that you're stealing from, or all the styles of the persons that you're stealing from, uh,
Mhm.
to make up your own. And so once you've embodied all those and you've played long enough and hopefully composed and improvised to add to the the nurturing of your individuality, uh, you style is it's so underrated, and I don't hear a lot talked about it in general. And I just think it's a huge uh, disservice to students who may not want to be learning all one style. If you're a piano teacher and you're only learning kind of legit piano repertoire, um,
Yeah.
maybe they would do well to learn a boogie woogie, as would be in Maryland. Lowe's curriculum has boogie and blues in it, and but the more you spread those things out, the more breadth you're giving to your students, and
Hmm.
and let them choose. But you're the master, so you're going to, the master teacher. I'm going to give myself over to you, and I chose you because I want to, for this purpose. This is where I'm going, and yeah, I want to play all the great literature, and that's what I want to do for my life. Well, there's lots of people making a great living doing that, but I don't know that we always have kids that know that they're going to not ever want to play in a rock band or develop a folk
Yeah.
ensemble or many other things, so many other things that you can do.
That's actually a really good point that you brought up about knowing kind of what your role is, what kind of teacher you are to this student. I mean, if you're teaching, I would say anyone that's teenage and under, your role, like air quote, should be to give them everything. But if you're a master bebop musician and people hunt you down because they want to learn that style, then you can be aware of that and exploit it, so that the student's getting more of the lessons. One really practical thing that I've done is when I get students to make playlists of just things they like. I'm not influencing the playlist at all. I'm just listen to music, show me what you're listening to, let's learn
Hmm.
it. When they show me something that has like clearly something from another style, like a song they're listening to has these Latin progressions or Latin kind of rhythms and rhythm patterns, or there's something, because a lot of pop musicians do draw from other styles, right? So they're not coming up with this stuff in a vacuum. They're stealing from other genres, and then that's your bridge. Once a student really is intrinsically interested in, like, for whatever reason, this piano rendition of this song that they're listening to, you can be like, well, that is actually just kind of in this style. And then you show them something like that. And that's such a good avenue, so they can see that everything is connected. I mean, for me, that's why I got really into like instrumental guitar music, because it was basically classical music played on electric guitar. And so the
Hmm.
style thing made sense. I was like, this is great. I'm an electric guitar player. I want to play like Mozart and Mendelssohn sounding stuff, and I'm just going to do it with a lot of distortion on. It was super fun. Uh, so
Yeah,
it was really just like rock and Baroque music in one. It
right.
was like Iron
So,
Maiden with Bach as the composer.
yeah. Do we mention timbre as right
Yeah.
inside that super context? And if I were that bebop monster that you're coming to, Bo, I would teach you everything up until the bebop era. I would let you get grounded heavily in the traditional jazz of the time prior, and then, of course, launch, but ground you in the roots of that.
I think that is such a good piece of advice that if say you like whatever Pat Metheny and you just go hard and you try to absorb as much Pat Metheny as you can, it's a really good idea to study who influenced your heroes. You know, And then that's what I did. I was like, oh, Pat Metheny, he just goes on and on about Wes Montgomery. Then after you play Wes, it's like, okay, I can see that Pat's not actually stealing everything from Wes, but there's something about Wes that's in Pat, and everything is just so crystal clear and almost like it just has this power behind it.
And then you go to Charlie Christian, and then Charlie Christian, then you go back, and on it goes.
You'll find these people though, like Wes Montgomery, who were like, they were essentially like portals that created other musicians. I mean, if you listen to George Benson, you can just see like George Benson is what happens when you take Wes Montgomery and grow up in an R&B environment. That's what you get. You get George Benson. And it's just like, oh, it all makes sense. And I freaking love George Benson. What a monster audio.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. I saw him live 2 summers ago. Or no, it was just last summer. I forget. It all runs together. But, then there's Hiram Bullock. It's an insane monster. Just an insane monster on electric guitar. Oh my, anyway, I could go on and on about the people I've seen. Big King, Buddy Guy. So much.
I used to go to I used to go to the library, and they had tons of classical CDs and jazz CDs, and I would just take out as many as they would let me, I think, because there was a cap. There's like 10 CDs at a time or something at my library here in Canada. And I would just listen to different stuff. And I really liked Chopin when I was younger a lot. There was something about Chopin that I liked a lot.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of your own style, and I think this is something teachers should think about, is your own musical development. It's really good to get a handle on teaching your students curriculum and teaching them, all the stuff you want to teach them. But I would also say that this is important for you to do as well, even if it's not in a really hyper accelerated way. Like, are you adding new listening vocabulary to your playlist, or do you even have playlists that you listen to? And you can, a real simple way to do this without overwhelming yourself is, let your intrinsic motivation guide you a little bit. Listen to some different musicians or whatever. And if it doesn't kind of click with you, if you don't feel this interest to keep going, then just find something that you do like. That's Hal Gelper's advice for what licks to learn. How do you know what licks to learn? Well, you learn the ones you like, because there's free motivation wired into them.
How do you know you
don't just learn a bunch of 2-5-1 licks because everyone said you got to learn this lick. Learn the ones you like.
Yeah, you got to listen to them.
And I think this is another circumstance where we can highlight the benefits of learning licks. Are really well accentuated when you think about style, because if you learn a certain lick by a certain artist, you're going to have to emulate the style and the style of phrasing that exists within that lick, the rhythm, phrasing, and the articulation and the dynamics and stuff like that. And that is another thing you learn from learning licks that you don't just learn from learning random tonal patterns that are devoid of the context of style. And I think that's been underplayed a bit by the MLT community, is the power of that. Because that's what we do with tonal patterns, is we learn them explicitly, directly, discrimination learning, and then we learn to do inference stuff. But it's the same thing with learning licks.
Yeah, these are generalizations, but we want more style, man. Come on, give me some more style in what you're teaching.
I recently watched School of Rock with my wife, and there's this scene where he has the band put together and the guitar, they're all doing their thing and they're playing, and then Jack Black, or Mr. Schneebly in the movie, he confronts the guitar player and he's like, I need some style. And he's kind of talking about stage presence too, which is part of rock music, the stage presence. And he's like, you're playing the right notes, but there's no power or authority in the phrasing or in the attitude behind it. And that is something. There's Jack Black is hilarious in that movie, but he is talking about something real there. Think of Thelonious Monk. This is one of the reasons I love Thelonious Monk. It's just really weird personality behind everything he played. Everything is just a little bit off. He harmonically and rhythmically, it's so it almost, Thelonious Monk, he's just got a pinch of Stravinsky in him. He's just a little bit kind of cracked out, and I love it. But he had his
Oh,
own thing
he's in
going.
my top five
Oh
ever.
yeah.
For a long time, I have to fight myself over, the subjectivity of who's your favorite kind of thing. But he was up there for a long time.
Yeah.
And my buddy tried to convince me that he's nothing compared to Oscar. Oscar, Oscar Peterson, man, could just swing so hard.
Yeah, but see, this is what I was saying about like comparing Nirvana to Mozart or whatever. Is that like if you use one single metric to compare other composers with, like Peterson was clearly like such a virtuoso and had all these chops down, but music is like a multi-dimensional domain, right? So just because someone has all these crazy harmonic chops doesn't mean they have kind of like a personality in how they phrase things. And you see
Yeah,
this a lot with jazz musicians. They're monster players, but they have no like individual personality in how they they do things, and they're not recognizable because of that.
back in the '80s, I actually saw Herbie Hancock came on stage and did, uh, a big long set, an hour and some minutes, hour and a half. And then he took a break, and then Oscar Peterson came out and did a set. And then they were going to just do one or two tunes together, and they came out, and Oscar just schooled poor Herbie, just schooled him hard. Only thing Herbie could do was go and put in all these crazy harmonies, but he was just getting toasted.
Yeah,
And it was just as great as Herbie is, Oscar had a different kind of vocabulary than Herbie would ever have. But that's how Herbie had to fight back, was with his harmonic style that he had. It's just that was one of those concerts. I just walked out. I don't know if I didn't say boo to anybody. I was there by myself, and when I got to the car, I like took my hands and they were stuck to the program. I had been holding it rolled up. I
like
took my
super hard.
hands and I opened them up, and there was a cool cigarette advertisement on the back, and it was all dark brown. I opened my hands, and my hands were dark brown, and I said, "Oh, I hope I got a little bit out of that concert."
Yeah.
That was something. That was a special moment. Talk about contrast in styles.
Well, and that can be an interesting thing about making playlists and studying certain musicians is that you might get really into like, this kind of more laid back minimalistic rhythmic playing that's more harmonically adventurous. And then you might start seeking out composers and musicians that accent that kind of playing. Or if you're just full blown, virtuosic bebop playing, you get like Peterson and Joe Pass and like I said this before, but they're the same in so many ways. They're just playing a different instrument. Peterson and Joe Pass. I had that insight finally because Joe Pass mentions this on one of his videos. He's like, "Yeah, honestly, I play a lot of the same kind of voicings as Peterson plays. Like we're kind of the same." And I was like, "Oh my god, they are." Because I'd been listening to Pass for years, and then I got into Oscar Peterson, and I was like, "Wow, I love Peterson." And the reason I liked it is all familiar vocabulary for me.
Yeah, yeah,
They use the same turnarounds and all that, and they're both very virtuosic. But
totally. All right, we did a good job on that one.
yeah,
Style.
hopefully we have them style.
We'll let the audience disagree. All right, man.
Okay, till next time.
Thanks.